the unsolved murder of David Breckenridge. At 10 a.m. on August 10, 2002, 28-year-old medical student David Breckenridge of St Leonards, New South Wales, Australia, began his double shift as a bartender at Moreton's Hotel on Sussex Street, Sydney. He finished his shift at 9 p.m. and travelled by bus to St Leonards Tavern, where he purchased a 6-pack of beer. At 11:52 p.m, he made a phone call from a public telephone booth to his friend Philip Noyce, telling him he had picked up a 6-pack and he'd be over soon to watch the Tri-Nations match between South Africa and New Zealand. Sadly, he never made it, and sometime between 11:52 p.m. and 12 a.m, he was brutally murdered in a frenzied knife attack. At around 12:04 a.m, his body was discovered slumped on the ground by a female motorist at the intersection of Berry Lane and the Pacific Highway of St Leonards. His murder was never solved, and this footage is minutes before he was murdered, when he purchased beer in the St Leonards Tavern. In the days after David's death, it emerged that he had celebrated his 28th birthday, and the day before that he had spent the night with a 19-year-old woman named Hannah Orlick. At the time, Orlick was dating a man named Paul Stapleton, and when he found out, he was furious. After hearing about David's murder, Orlick broke it off with Stapleton and went to the police with information that he drove a black car after hearing a black car was part of the police's case. Understandably, Stapleton became a suspect, but he had an alibi and told police he was with 3 friends watching the rugby game at the time of the murder, something they confirmed at the time. However, since then, 2 of the friends Stapleton relied on for his alibi denied he was with them at the time, and the other friend cannot remember. Although it's worth pointing out that Stapleton was never charged and has always denied any involvement in the murder. In a 2005 inquest into the murder, an open finding was delivered and the coroner found there was a lack of evidence linking Stapleton to the scene of the crime, stating it was a very remote possibility for him to be involved. David's parents described their son as intelligent and charismatic, and not only was he seldom in trouble, but he actively avoided it, and they were completely baffled why anyone would want to murder him. One of the biggest mysteries surrounding this case is why nobody saw what happened to him. There were a lot of people around that night, yet apparently only 2 people have come forward to state what they witnessed. Also, the Pacific Highway has cars streaming past the murder site at all time, yet only 2 people came forward as having seen something. It's thought several people saw his body and just kept driving. So why did no one stop to save him or come forward to identify his killer? The murder of David Breckenridge is the subject of a 5-part podcast by the Daily Telegraph called 8 Minutes. Stella Lansing. In 1961, Stella Lansing was at her home in Northampton, Massachusetts, when she spotted an orb-like object hovering over her house. The object appeared to be observing her before it suddenly zoomed towards her, hovering briefly in front of her before darting away and disappearing. 4 years after the incident in 1965, Stella had another similar encounter. It happened while she was driving to a friend's house to deliver candles during the US East Coast power blackout. Stella was alone in her car when she saw the orb-like object following her by weaving in and out of the telephone poles along the side of the road. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, a menacing dark car appeared on the road alongside her, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she believed that the orb was driving the car. The car eventually pulled over to the side of the road and came to a stop. Stella, feeling for her life, kept driving, but she could still see the orb heading over the fields that ran alongside the highway before it finally disappeared. Over the next few months, both Stella and her children would regularly see the orbs. Sometimes they would remain still, and other times they would appear to be following them. However, on Halloween night 1966, the experiences took a terrifying turn. At around 7:20 p.m, Stella parked her car in a space overlooking a lake. but as she went to switch off her headlights, she saw a strange figure emerge from the water. Stella described it as wearing a black skull cap. In a panic, she screeched away from the scene, but as she looked in her rearview mirror, she could see the figure standing upright on the bank. It began to run towards an orange orb of light that had appeared out of nowhere. A strange mist seemed to be radiating from the orb, when suddenly a much larger red orb swooped down and then rushed away into the distance, seemingly taking the figure with it. It wasn't only Stella that witnessed strange orbs that night, 2 of her neighbours also saw them. After the incident, Stella was determined to capture a photograph of what she was seeing, so she obtained an 8mm camera. In February 1967, almost 3 months after the Halloween incident, Stella was driving along Route 32 when she again noticed lights overhead. She immediately stopped her car to get out to get a better look, and another car also pulled up beside her. Overhead, 2 yellow lights were silently moving from east to west in the direction of the cemetery. By the time Lansing had retrieved her camera from the car, 2 more lights had appeared, and one of them seemed to be bouncing in the sky. Stella recorded the scene in its entirety, and the person from the car parked beside her joined her on the road to observe these bizarre events. It would be over a year later, in April 1968, when Stella finally obtained a projector in order to watch and examine the film in detail. The projector featured the latest technology that allowed her to slow the frames down to 2 frames per second, and this highlighted the amazing and chilling images contained on the film. It's never been converted to video, so all we have is still images, but take a look. In one of the images, Stella could clearly see the heads and bodies of strange men. She would later say, "I never saw the people when filming it. I can't tell you what object they came out of, or what they were in. The only thing I could think of is that they must have come from the soft white object." Stella claimed the white object remained hovering above her while she was filming. The 4 strange men that Stella had captured would become known as the occupants. Over the following years, Stella continued to notice strange images and symbols on frames of her films. One that continually came up was what appeared to be a clock pattern that was imposed across the frames. One of these became known as the monk. In 1971, after years of these experiences, Stella met Dr. Berthold Erich Schwarz at a UFO conference. Dr. Schwarz had a keen interest in the paranormal, including ufology, and was extremely interested in what Stella had to say. Schwarz went on to perform extensive medical, physical, and neurological examinations of Stella, all of which came back perfectly normal. However, he soon learned that years of sightings and being witness to strange activity had more than taken their toll on Stella's mental health. So much so that in 1967 she had voluntarily entered the State Hospital for psychiatric evaluation. There it was determined that she was a paranoid schizophrenic, and what she was witnessing was hallucinations, not UFOs. During her evaluation, Stella also claimed to have communicated with the devil. But after spending time with Stella and examining the images she had captured, Schwarz was convinced of her authenticity. This belief was reinforced on the 15th of April 1971, when Schwarz, Stella, and an unnamed woman made their way to a spot where many of her sightings had taken place. As the car stopped and the headlights were turned off, within a matter of minutes a pair of glowing yellow orbs could be seen above them. But something equally strange happened that evening. As the 3 of them stood there looking at the extraordinary sight, a strange black car approached them and shined its headlights on them. What followed is what many would describe today as a Men in Black type experience. The 3 witnesses decided they should get back in their car and leave the area. As they drove away, the mystery vehicle slowly followed them, before suddenly increasing its speed dramatically and screaming past them. In 1991, a television show, Sightings, picked up on Lansing's story. They obtained her film and transferred it to VHS tape for purpose of the broadcast. The picture that showed the occupant's image, when viewed on the newly transferred VHS tape, now contains strange and mysterious voices, only audible over this particular section of footage. Even Stella was shocked by this new revelation. However, no one really took her claims seriously, but despite this, Stella continued to search the phenomena she managed to capture and tap into. Nevertheless, at the time of her death in 2012, she still had no answers as to what she was seeing or why. Raymond Coy disappearance. On the morning of 13th of February 2017, Raymond Coy, a Christian pastor from Malaysia, was exiting a highway in the suburb of Kalina Jaya, just outside of Kuala Lumpur, when a convoy of black SUVs and motorcycles surrounded his white car and boxed it in by the side of the road. Although the trees are obscuring the view, it is clear that Mr. Coy has been abducted in a highly organised operation that took less than 60 seconds. Mr. Coy is bundled into one of the SUVs, and another member of the gang can be seen driving his white car from the scene. The whole incident played out in broad daylight and was witnessed by other drivers on the road that day. However, since the abduction, no one has seen or heard from Raymond since. Initially, investigators thought it was a kidnapping, but no ransom has been demanded. And as the weeks passed, it was clear it was no ordinary kidnapping, and that possibly a religious element was responsible. Mr. Coy ran a non-government organisation called Hope Community in Kuala Lumpur, which helped the poor, single mothers and drug addicts. However, in 2011, the organisation was investigated by Malaysia's Islamic authorities after being accused of attempting to convert Muslims to Christianity, which is an offence in Muslim-majority Malaysia. The allegations were later dropped, but Mr. Coy remained a target of online rumours and even received 2 bullets in the post shortly afterwards. The abduction appeared to be an isolated case, but amid the media onslaught over his disappearance and the video clip, stories about other missing Malaysians began to emerge, several that still remain unexplained, and police started to believe the incidents were connected and raised fears of religious vigilantism. Over the years, Malaysian police have given few updates, other than that they were pursuing 3 angles: that he had personal issues, extremist groups were involved, or that he was kidnapped for ransom, although no evidence pointing any of these theories has been discovered. So where is Raymond Coy? Is he still being held somewhere against his will, or has something more sinister happened to him? What do you think? The woman in the tree. Now this is a strange one. It didn't get much attention a few years ago when it first emerged, but we thought it was worth a look. It was filmed in India in around 2017 and shows an elderly woman climbing a large tree with considerable ease for a person of her age. As she nears the top, it only gets more bizarre. Take a look. It's a mystery how this woman is able to stand on the very top of those flimsy tree branches without them snapping. The footage has been dubbed Ghost Woman or Woman Possessed, and many in the area believe witchcraft was involved. Now, we don't have an answer for this odd spectacle, and it has been suggested it was a hoax, although we can't see any evidence of that. What is remarkable is that the woman stands on top of the tree for over half an hour, barely moving with her hands behind her back, just balancing there. Many believe the woman is possessed, although personally we think some kind of mental illness may be involved. Let us know your thoughts on this bizarre footage in the comments. Kendrick Johnson. On January 11th, 2013, the body of 17-year-old student Kendrick Johnson was found in the most unusual of circumstances. He was upside down and rolled up in a school gym mat in the gymnasium of Lowndes High School in the US state of Georgia. A preliminary investigation and autopsy concluded that the death was a tragic accident and that Kendrick died due to positional asphyxia, meaning he suffocated as a result of being stuck upside down in an enclosed space for an extended period. Investigators concluded that Kendrick must have accidentally fallen into the centre of the mat while reaching for a sneaker, which he had stored there, so as not to have to pay for a locker. However, his parents thought differently and believed their son's death was suspicious, and that it was not being taken seriously, either because of his race or because of a larger cover-up. As we look at the evidence in the footage, it's easy to see why they think it wasn't an accident. When the mat was unrolled, Kendrick was found with one arm stretched above his head and the other down around his waist, as though he was reaching for his shoe. A black and white gym shoe lay on the ground below his body, and this was presumed to be what he was reaching for. Although strangely, despite the shoe being found in a pool of blood, there was no blood on the shoe itself. A hoodie and a pair of orange and black gym shoes were also found lying on the floor of the gym, as well as traces of blood on the wall nearby. Tests revealed the blood on the walls did not belong to Kendrick Johnson, and had likely been there for a long time. For unknown reasons, investigators did not take the hoodie and orange and black gym shoes into evidence. The mat was around 6 feet tall, and when rolled up, left a 14-inch hole in diameter in the centre. Kendrick's shoulders measured 19 inches across, and he was 5 feet 10 inches tall. So how did he manage to fall headfirst into a hole that small in the first place? Kendrick was upside down in the mat for almost a day, meaning blood would have rushed to his head, and he eventually would have begun to bleed from his facial orifices. But why did none of the blood drip onto the top of the trainer? Johnson's parents were suspicious of the investigation from the start, and believed that the sheriff's department was too quick to rule out foul play as a cause for Kendrick's death. They were also sure that their son's body had been moved, which was corroborated by Lowndes County Coroner Bill Watson. Furthermore, Johnson's parents argued if this was an accident, how come no one heard Kendrick call for help in a high school of over 3,000 students? Shortly after Kendrick's death, his parents released a photo to the media of their son's face as he lay in the funeral home. We're not going to show it because it's horrific. Eventually, on May the 8th, 2013, a judge granted that Kendrick Johnson's body could be exhumed, so a private pathologist could perform a secondary autopsy. This time the autopsy revealed that Kendrick Johnson had suffered hemorrhaging on the right side of his neck, which meant that he likely died from blunt force trauma. The pathologist concluded his death was not an accident. If this wasn't bad enough, the second autopsy also revealed that some of Kendrick's organs were missing, and in their place, his body had been stuffed with newspaper. Apparently the organs were lost, meaning they could not be tested during the second autopsy, which further aroused suspicion of a cover-up. As a result of this new evidence, Matthew Moore, the US Attorney for the Middle District of Georgia, announced a formal review of the case. However, inexplicably, the Johnsons' request for a new inquest was denied. In November 2013, CNN gained access to the school's security footage on the day that Kendrick Johnson died, but sadly it offered little insight into what happened that day, as the cameras which faced the mats were unfocused and skipped around. All that could be seen from the cameras was Kendrick Johnson walking towards the gym and then several seconds of footage of him jogging within the gym. Chillingly, this is thought to be the last hours of Kendrick's life. Take a look. It was discovered that a whole hour of footage from the gym was missing, right at the time that would have shed light on what happened that day. This finding further increased the belief that this death was not an accident. The Johnsons continued to fight for justice, and in 2014 they filed a wrongful death suit against the school's officials, alleging that Kendrick had been harassed by a student, which went neglected by the school. They also believed two white brothers had killed Kendrick because of a fight they had over a year earlier, which had escalated, and that their father, an FBI agent at the time, had covered up the murder. In 2015, the Johnsons filed a $100 million civil lawsuit against 38 people, including 3 of their son's classmates, the school, the local crime lab, state and federal officials, 5 agents of the GBI, an FBI agent, and more. Johnson's father, however, admitted that he had no hard evidence, and eventually the Johnsons had to drop the suit. They were later sued for more than $850,000 in attorney fees and more than $1 million in defamation charges, and were ultimately ordered by a judge to pay close to $300,000 worth of lawyer fees to those they had accused with no evidence. In June 2016, the Department of Justice announced no charges would be filed against anyone in relation to Kendrick Johnson's death, as there was insufficient evidence to support federal criminal charges. It's also worth noting that organs are often removed, and although it's incredibly bad practice, it's not illegal for the space to be stuffed with newspaper before being buried. So although it's not nice to think about, that cannot be used as evidence of a cover-up. But in June 2018, Kendrick Johnson's body was exhumed for a second time, and a third autopsy was performed. The findings of this autopsy, that Johnson's death was not accidental and was caused by blunt force trauma, likely due to being struck in the neck with a 45-pound dumbbell. Kendrick Johnson's parents hoped that with the results of this third autopsy, the surveillance footage, which they were convinced had been tampered with, and the mishandling of evidence at the scene would be enough to reopen their son's case. As of May 2019, the family has filed another suit against the funeral home, but we have no further updates on that. It must be hard to make sense of your child's death, especially when there seems to be unanswered questions. Now this case will take you down a rabbit hole and will constantly make you bounce between thinking it was accidental and was a possible murder. We suggest that you look into this one further, as it definitely requires some extra reading. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next video.